Estate planning issues got you down? No worries, we have your answers here on this episode of Unlock Your Wealth Today, your life fully invested. Welcome to Unlock Your Wealth Today, your life fully invested. I'm your purveyor of prosperity and host, Heather Wagenhals, and on this episode, we are going to talk estate planning issues and how to overcome them or keep them from becoming an issue. And let's talk about estate planning. It's one of our 3-5 financial strategy. It's part of our 5th area of concern, which is asset preservation, which we do two things. We answer the question, how do I want to be remembered? So we also want to mitigate taxes as well as create our legacy and pass on the assets we want to those who we anticipate receiving them. If you don't, you're going to have issues like Uncle Sam or the courts get to decide who gets your stuff. And is that really how you want to be remembered? Probably not. So I have an incredible attorney joining us. He comes from the other side of the fence of estate planning. He's the guy that litigates estate planning issues. And why are we talking to him? Well, because we want to know what the big issues are so you can overcome them through the estate planning process. So let's get started with my guest today, Karl Prior. Karl, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're a part of Unlock Your Wealth Today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm excited that you're here because I was just having a conversation over the weekend about estate planning issues that could arise. And they were talking about choosing executors, and parents were having a couple of issues and about splitting things. And, and then, they had other issues too, because they're dealing with two separate countries and tax and stuff like that. And I said, I don't know who your parents are consulting, but they really need to seek the advice of a well-rehearsed, practiced estate planning attorney. And now you focus on the litigation aspect. Tell us a little bit about what you do for folks when there's a challenge dealing with estates.
Yeah, Heather, what Mannion Prior does, what our firm does, is we focus on trust and estate litigation. And we see it more from a forensic perspective. In other words, we don't prevent bad things from happening, but we are able to come in and diagnose why bad things happened. And that puts us, I think, in a pretty good position to highlight for others what areas can be problematic in the estate planning process, and more particularly in choosing fiduciaries, that is executors or trustees of a trust. Some pratfalls, some warning signs, things you ought to look out for, as well as some tips that'll put you on the right path.
So what are, say, because I'm sure there's a litany of them, what are the top 3 estate planning issues that you see come up regularly, like the most popular ones that aren't properly addressed up front through the estate planning process?
Well, the first one, the largest by far, in terms of creating dysfunction or dissension, is any kind of a blended family situation. That's not to say all blended families, but typically a fertile breeding ground for trust and estate disputes is when you have children from one marriage and the spouse has remarried, and children from the first marriage have questions about the second or third spouse and what their father or their mother is doing for that second or third spouse. That's a hot area. A lot of good estate planners can navigate around that, but unfortunately many don't. Another area, sorry.
Well, that's a legal issue that has to address a very emotional one, so because you've got to sort through feelings and, well, while I love your kids, my stuff should go to my kids, and how does, what advice do you have for folks that have to do with that? I mean, is it just simple one-on-one conversations with spouses? Is this something that maybe, therapists should be consulted with? I mean, what's the best way to broach this without hurting people's feelings, but addressing the most important issues?
I think transparency. I do think you need to have a meaningful and open discussion with your second or maybe third spouse. More often than not, these kinds of issues get addressed in prenuptial agreements before that second or third marriage even takes place. And so the second or third spouse will often disclaim an interest in your estate, or they may agree to a specific provision, and everybody knows about it. Like the children from the first marriage know about it. The second spouse knows about it. Gifted attorneys are involved in drafting documents, and when that happens, you can navigate around those kinds of issues. But when it doesn't happen, in many states, there are rights that the second spouse has as a matter of law, and that can give rise to some pretty serious disruption to whatever your estate planning is.
Well, and I know within my family firsthand how nasty stuff can get. People fight over the silliest things, in like pots and pans, or who gets like the recliner. It's like, really? You're not going to talk to your sibling for the rest of your life because somebody else got that favorite recliner?
You know what's hilarious about that? You call it pots and pans. We call it spoons and knives. And see those fights all the time. And I'll tell you something else. The recliner or the rug or the portrait in the hallway, it's never worth what people think it's worth. It's
right.
Like high money value. Like when someone says, hey, I want Dad's coin collection, it was worth a lot. It's never worth what you think it was worth. Never. It's all junk.
Right. I mean, if it was a fire sale, you'd be lucky to get $50 for some stuff. So people are misaligning, I think, personal value and actual value in those situations, and it's silly because ideally, I think what it boils down to, or at least in my experience dealing with some of my financial coaching clients, it's about how the individual feels. Well, I love Dad more, or I was special. Why did Dad give that to you? Or why did Mom leave that to you? And I think that sometimes becomes more of the issue for the kids.
It does. I talk all the time at Mannion Prior about fighting over principal spelled PLE at the end, and principal spelled PAL at the end. And, fight over principle spelled PAL, the legal system can work for you. You'll do a cost-benefit analysis. You'll make rational decisions. But if you fight over things called principle PLE at the end, you're in for a boatload of trouble, because that's when people dig in and they don't make cost-efficient decisions. And then there's the famous last words: I'd rather pay you than pay my sister or pay my brother. And then inevitably, the only people that win in that scenario are the lawyers right here. I'll win if you want to fight over principle. You won't, but I'll win.
Well, yeah, because it comes splitting hairs like that. So taking the time to have a meaningful conversation up front with your significant other, spouse, however it's legally assembled in whatever your region is, and then going to the estate planning attorney.
Yeah, and having a conversation with them. I think every conversation with your estate planning attorney has to deal with two issues right up front. One is, what is it that you want to do? What are your long-term goals with your estate plan? Do you look to build a legacy over decades that's going to take care of generations of your family? Or are you looking to simply take care of your immediate generation? And beyond that, it's on them. The other issue is not only what is your goal, but what are the nature of your assets? If you have a significant stock portfolio with some pretty sophisticated investments, that may call for one level of estate plan and one level of trustee or executor, for example. If, on the other hand, your most sizable asset, for example, is a family business in a very focused and specialized industry or area, that may call for more of a participation rate by somebody in the family to actually be involved in the estate planning process, because after all, you're now affecting their well-being, the family wealth, for the foreseeable future.
Great. Well, this is a wealth of information. I want to get to the other points here in the next segment. You are watching Karl Prior on Unlock Your Wealth Today. We'll be right back with more right after this. Welcome back to Unlock Your Wealth Today. Your life fully invested. I'm your purveyor of prosperity and host, Heather Wagenhals, and I have an incredible attorney talking about estate planning woes. Karl Prior has joined us, and we're going to pick that conversation right back up. Welcome back to the show, Karl. So we were talking about wills and estates and how things get kind of divided up, how you nominate people. And we started talking about businesses at the end of the last segment. And so as I'm thinking about this, what I have seen in my financial practice and what I've observed are people nominating people. So they get the estate planning part right. So they go in and they map it out. But as an heir or a survivor who may have a vested interest in this business or expect to derive some sort of income stream from it, don't like the succession plan, or there's going to be some heirs, maybe also so heirs that are also being assigned roles within the company. Is this something like that we should separate and have like our separate, like a business estate plan as well as a professional estate plan, like a personal estate plan? Or how does that, because that seems just real convoluted to me. That's why.
I think they're often the same thing. I think that the business estate plan is effectively the personal estate plan, particularly when you're dealing with entrepreneurs, people who have built companies from scratch. And the company not only is their largest asset, but it significantly defines them. It is their legacy. It's how they want to be remembered, but it's also the wealth that they want to pass on to their kids. And so there, I think that your business plan becomes part of your estate plan, particularly if you're closely held. In other words, not necessarily a publicly traded corporation, but all the stock is held by whoever it is that is the owner, that's the person doing the estate plan. In that situation, you need to think about certain vehicles, and you need to think who's going to drive those vehicles, you'll pardon the metaphor. So, for example, maybe you want to put your business into a trust, and so that business becomes the largest asset of the trust. Well, who would it make sense to have as trustees of that trust? Probably somebody that knows a little something about your business. And so if your business is you make the best snow cones in all of Orange County, then maybe you need to know somebody that knows about the snow cone market in Orange County to be a trustee, so that they can recognize from the outside when the business is being mismanaged or when people are in inappropriate positions. They're in over their head, maybe because they're family and they got promoted beyond their skill set, or for other reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you hear that adage, 3 generations from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves. And so, you wonder how that's handled. So have you ever seen challenges or fights with amongst the heirs when like there's disagreement, and is there any recourse for an heir, or is that something that should be handled through the structure of the company? I mean, how would one approach that?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. It can get handled through the structure of the company, but also there is a role for the trust or the estate, particularly as the owner. Remember that if the trust or the estate owns the shares in the company, then it has the same rights that any shareholder has. And so if the trust or estate sees the company being mismanaged, the trust or the estate in theory can take action. Now, where things get a little hairy, Heather, and where we see things get a little crazy, is when the person who's in charge of the trust or the estate is the same exact person that's in charge of the very business that's being mismanaged, because then you have that inherent conflict of interest.
Right.
So are you, in fulfilling your fiduciary duties, your duties of faithfulness and loyalty to the beneficiaries of the estate and to the heirs, going to pursue yourself for your own mismanagement? So the answer is that, as you can imagine, that doesn't happen all that often. In fact, probably never. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's important that you have other people besides just the person that's running the business, mm-hmm. serving as an executor or a trustee. Possibly even you have a corporate entity in there, because corporations bring certain skill sets. Trust companies bring certain skill sets, including expertise in certain industries. They can recognize mismanagement when they see it, and not being conflicted, they will mm-hmm. act on it.
Okay. This is incredible information, and we have lots of entrepreneurs that watch this show. And so answering that question, that might have been something that they were thinking about. So in addition to the blended families and, addressing, companies and ownership and legacy and succession plans, what is like probably one of the next highest types of conflicts that you find in your practice?
Well, there's always going to be conflicts with people who are disappointed with what they received in or from an estate plan. That's just human nature. Unfortunately, a lot of folks measure how much they think their parents cared about them by what they got left in a trust or an estate plan. And those folks can be difficult after you pass. They can cause problems for whoever it is that you left in charge of your estate or your estate plan. They might even go so far as to contest or challenge the operative documents. At our firm at Mannion Prior, we see an awful lot of that, and get involved in defending the plan that you put together to take care of your businesses, to take care of your legacy going forward. And those challenges, Heather, can come in all different directions. They can be a claim that somebody improperly influenced dad or mom to do something with the business or to do something with the assets that they otherwise might not have done. Or they could be a claim simply for the sake of making a claim that the businesses are being mismanaged. Yeah, we're going to stand by the estate plan, but we just don't like how you're operating or how you're running those businesses. You're not generating enough cash for me.
So trusts are an ongoing type of instrument. So does it make sense to have somebody outside the family if there are potential very contentious relationships with siblings?
Yeah, one of the things that corporate trustees will often market, and to their credit, this is actually true, which is that sometimes going with a corporate trustee, not necessarily a corporate trustee alone, but a corporate trustee among your trustees, is a very prophylactic measure against family discord. And frankly, a lot of these folks do have experience in very specialized areas. Oil and gas leases, for example. There are people out there that are actually corporate trustees who specialize and have garnered knowledge in that area. They can discuss things like mineral rights and things of that nature. But yeah, and then also the other advantage is if you foresee the asset or the business continuing for several generations, one of the advantages of a corporate trustee is you get continuity there. The corporation inevitably will have some sort of culture. It'll have record keeping. It'll have tax preparation skills. It'll have in-house attorneys. It'll have a whole variety of expertise that it can offer that will help and remain consistent over generations. Whereas sometimes if you just put an individual family member in, as you said, from wealth to shirt sleeves in a matter of 3 generations, with the first time your trustee changes, the first time you have a successor trustee, everything can change for the corporation or for the asset picture.
Right. And when we talk, about estate planning, it fits into our 5 areas of concern in our 3-5 financial strategy, and so, as we deal with, asset preservation, I mean, it's not just, how do we mitigate taxes and how do we preserve our legacy? And I think you mentioned it earlier. The first question that I ask everybody when we sit down and go through our 3-5 financial strategy is, how do you want to be remembered? And not just, by your friends or your family members, but like, what is your legacy? What do you want your life to mean? Because you have to think about that and work towards that end without, you have to have that end goal in mind. And a lot of people, because it involves death and specifically their own demise, people don't like to think about it. When or at what pile of money, and I think that, even, individuals with relatively little assets should at least do a will, especially if they have life insurance, if they have children or things like that. But is there a particular dollar amount or a number of family members where people need to start focusing on estate planning before it becomes a problem and gets to you?
Yeah, the dollar amount is $1, and the number of people to be concerned about is 1 or above.
Okay.
It really can, because dissension, discord, it doesn't necessarily tie into economic values. As we were discussing earlier, a lot of times it comes into play with just pure emotional, psychological variables, things that have been happening since the sandbox. And so there's not really, if you quantify what it is that you're going to do and say, I'm not going to go to a lawyer before, say, I have $100,000 in assets, which, is a minimal asset picture to say the least, but like people will fight over $100,000. And then what you just talked about, your legacy becomes you left a mess behind that your kids or whatever are fighting over, even if it's just one, even if it's just one person.
Right, because if you don't, and then you're letting the courts who don't know you, who don't know what was important to you, to be the ones to divvy up all of your assets amongst your heirs. I mean, that's the biggest challenge that I have. If you do nothing, you're letting somebody else dictate what your legacy is.
Absolutely, and usually at a higher tax rate or with more significant
Yeah.
tax implications than if you've done something. Hey, you mentioned something earlier that I think is worth focusing on just for a second, if you don't mind. You talked about your legacy being more than just the assets that you leave behind, but whether you want to do good for somebody or provide for somebody in your estate plan, maybe a charity, maybe a nonprofit of some form. One of the really neat things about doing that as part of your estate plan is that if your estate plan ever gets challenged or in any way contested, many states, if there are charitable beneficiaries in your estate plan, many states will actually step forward through the state attorney general and help defend your estate plan in a court of law. So if you have the foresight to say, hey, I want to leave something to the local YMCA. I used to go swim there every Tuesday morning. It was a great place. I got $1 million I want to leave to the YMCA. And all of a sudden there's trouble in the estate. By virtue of the fact that you left funds to a charitable or to a nonprofit institution, in Pennsylvania, for example, the state attorney general will step in and help defend that bequest. It's kind of a cool thing that you have, in some cases, you can actually have the state as an ally, but it all depends on you doing a written estate plan, just like you were talking about a few minutes ago.
Well, that's amazing. You have been a tremendous wealth of information, and looking at it from your perspective as to what goes sideways, I think is a great way to approach this, because people don't always think in those terms, but when we are faced with the reality of what can go wrong, now we have more of an impetus to take action and actually get that estate plan done from dollar one to person one. So I love that. So if folks want to find out more information about what you do, if they have questions or their own estate planning woes that might need to be solved legally, how do folks find you?
You can find us, particularly if you're in Pennsylvania, at www.mannionprior.com. Even if you're not in Pennsylvania, we usually have an awful lot of helpful links on the website. We link to famous newspaper. We link to articles about very famous people's estates, what went wrong with their estates. But our website is a treasure trove of information. And obviously, if it's Discord and if it's in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we certainly can help.
Well, thank you so much for being a part of the show. We're really grateful for all the information you shared. And for those of you without a pencil, never fear, unlockyourwealthtoday.com is here where you can visit Karl's show page, get the links to all of his resources, and so much more. For the maestro of Moolah, Michael Terry, I'm Heather Wagenhals. Now go out and unlock your wealth today.
UnlockYourWealthToday.com is produced by Heather Wagenhals and the Unlock Your Wealth Foundation. UnlockYourWealthToday.com and its affiliates are copyrighted 2018 with all rights reserved. For more information on the Keys to Riches Financial Wellness Series, please visit our website at www.unlockyourwealthtoday.com.